I signed the closing papers on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. $300,000 of debt felt lighter than the weight of my parents' expectations. I thought I had finally carved out a safe corner for myself. Then my mother called. She said they had found the perfect house for me. She did not know I already owned one. I realized then that this was never about real estate. It was about ownership. My name is Morgan Hale. I am 34 years old. I live in a coastal city where the salt air eats the paint off cars if you do not wash them every week. I work as a supply chain analyst for a mid-sized shipping firm. It is the kind of job that sounds boring at dinner parties, which suits me fine because I do not get invited to many dinner parties. My life is efficient. I wake up at 6 in the morning. I drink coffee that tastes like mud. I drive a sedan that is fully paid off. I do not have a ring on my finger, and I do not have a nursery to decorate. To most people, I am just a woman existing in the background of a busy city. But to my family, I am a crisis waiting to happen. My phone sat on the kitchen counter like an unexploded bomb. It was silent now, but the ghost of my mother's voice always seemed to linger around it. Linda Hale does not just speak. She curates. She edits. She decides what the reality is, and then she waits for the rest of us to catch up. For 3 decades, she has looked at me and seen a rough draft that needs heavy revision. Morgan, you really should think about coming home for the weekend, she had said during our last call, her voice dripping with that weaponized concern she has perfected. Your father. He worries about you being all alone out there. It's not natural. I remember holding the phone away from my ear, staring at a spreadsheet on my laptop. Natural. That was her favorite word. It was natural for my brother, who is 2 years younger than me, to ask for money to start a business that everyone knew would fail. It was natural for my parents to refinance their house twice to pay for vacations they could not afford. But me, living 2 hours away, paying my own bills, and minding my own business, that was unnatural. That was suspicious. I am not poor. I make $85,000 a year. I have a savings account that sits comfortably in the 6 figures, but my parents do not know this. If they knew, the dynamic would shift. And they are terrified of shifts. They need me to be the struggling one. It validates their interference. It justifies the way they talk at me rather than to me. I looked around my apartment. It was a 1-bedroom unit on the 2nd floor of a complex built in the 1980s. The carpet was a shade of beige that looked like it had given up on life. The walls were thin enough that I could hear my neighbor sneeze. It was clean. It was organized, but it was not mine. Every month, I wrote a check for $1,200 to a landlord I had met exactly once. I was paying for the privilege of temporary shelter. I walked to the window and pressed my hand against the cold glass. The reflection staring back at me looked tired, not the kind of tired that comes from a lack of sleep, but the deep, marrow-level exhaustion of someone who has spent a lifetime being underestimated. I thought about the money I had sent them over the years, the loans that were never repaid, the emergency transfers when their credit cards maxed out. I had wired $4,000 when my dad needed dental surgery. I had paid off a $5,000 lingering debt for my mom so she wouldn't have to deal with collectors. I did it quietly. I did it because I could. And in return, they treated me like I was incapable of ordering lunch without supervision. You don't understand how the world works. Morgan, my father likes to say, you need guidance, someone to steer you right. He says this to the woman who manages logistics for fleets moving across the Atlantic Ocean. The irony is so sharp it could cut skin. I turned away from the window. The apartment felt smaller than usual tonight. The rental furniture looked foreign. I realized I was 40% of the way through my life, and I was still living like a transient student. I was hoarding my money, protecting my credit score, and waiting. But waiting for what? For them to give me permission to be an adult. That permission was never coming. They needed me to be a child so they could feel like parents. I sat down at my small, wobbly kitchen table. The lease renewal notice was sitting next to a stack of junk mail. They wanted to raise the rent by $150. It was a small amount. I could afford it. But as I looked at that piece of paper, something inside me snapped. It was a quiet snap, like a dry twig stepping under a heavy boot. I was done paying for things I did not own. I was done renting space in the world. I was done renting space in my own family. No more, I whispered to the empty room. I did not know it yet, but I had just made the most dangerous decision of my life. I was going to buy a house, and I was not going to tell a soul until the keys were in my hand. The search began in silence. I became a ghost in the real estate market, slipping into open houses on my lunch breaks and scrolling through listings at 2 a.m. with the brightness on my phone turned all the way down. I deleted my browser history every single night. It felt ridiculous, like I was hiding an affair. But in my family, autonomy was treated like treason. If I had told my mother I was looking for a house, the deluge would have been instantaneous. She would have sent me links to properties that were $50,000 over my budget because she liked the curb appeal. She would have insisted on coming to inspections. She would have stood in the middle of a living room I loved and pointed out a microscopic crack in the ceiling, sighing that specialized sigh of hers. "Morgan, are you sure you're ready for this kind of responsibility? A house is a lot of work for a single woman," she would have said. I could hear the ellipsis in her voice before she even spoke the words. I was not going to give her the chance to plant that seed of doubt. I worked with a small, reputable firm called Horizon View Financial. My loan officer was a man named Mr. Henderson, who wore bow ties and spoke in rapid-fire percentages. He did not look at me like a child. He looked at my tax returns, my credit score, which hovered around 800, and my debt-to-income ratio. He treated me like a solvable equation. "So your financials are incredibly solid," he told me during our second meeting. "We usually see this level of liquidity from couples, not individual buyers. You have been very disciplined." "I like to be prepared," I answered. "Well, you are certainly that. We can lock you in at a rate of 5.5% if you sign the disclosure today." Signing those papers felt like taking a breath of pure oxygen after holding my breath underwater for 30 years. Every decision was mine. I chose the fixed-rate mortgage. I chose the 20% down payment. I chose the title insurance. There was no one looking over my shoulder asking if I was sure. There was no fatherly hand patting my back while whispering that I should let the men handle the numbers. It was terrifying. Yes, but it was a clean, sharp terror that made me feel alive. The house I chose was not a mansion. It was a sturdy, single-story brick house built in the 1970s, located in a quiet neighborhood about 20 minutes from my office. It had 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and a kitchen that desperately needed updating. The cabinets were a hideous shade of avocado green, and the carpets in the hallway were worn thin. But the foundation was solid. The roof was new, and most importantly, the deed had exactly one name on it: Morgan Hale. I closed on a Friday morning. The title company office smelled like stale coffee and toner ink. My hand cramped as I signed my name over and over again. Morgan Hale, Morgan Hale, Morgan Hale. When the notary slid the keys across the mahogany table toward me, they made a heavy metallic sound. "Congratulations," she said, smiling politely. "It is officially yours." "Thank you," I said. My voice was steady, but my hands were shaking slightly under the table. I drove straight to the house. I unlocked the front door and stood in the empty living room. The silence was absolute. It did not smell like my parents' house, which always smelled of lavender and judgment. It smelled of dust and potential. I walked to the center of the room and spun around slowly. I had done it. I had saved $65,000 in secret. I had navigated the market. I had bought a home. My plan was simple. I would spend the next month painting and moving in slowly. Once I was settled, once my furniture was arranged and the avocado cabinets were painted white, I would invite them over for a dinner. I would serve roast chicken and wine, and I would say, "Welcome to my home." By then, it would be a done deal. They could not talk me out of a house I already owned. They could not critique the price I already paid. I stood there, clutching my keys, feeling a profound sense of peace. But as the afternoon sun began to dip below the tree line, casting long shadows across my unpolished floorboards, a shiver ran down my spine. It was a primal instinct, the kind a prey animal feels when the wind changes direction. I looked at my phone. It was silent, but silence in the Hale family was never empty. It was just the deep breath before the scream. I had the keys, but I suddenly felt that keeping them was going to be much harder than getting them. I was taping up a box of winter coats in my living room when my phone rang. It was 7 o'clock on a Tuesday evening. The screen lit up with the words, "Mom's cell," and the device vibrated aggressively against the cardboard box. My stomach tightened. It was a reflex I had developed over 3 decades, the instant physiological rejection of whatever was coming through that speaker. I took a deep breath, composed my voice, and swiped to answer. "Hello." "Morgan." "Oh, thank God you picked up." My mother's voice burst through the line, breathless and high-pitched. "You are not going to believe what we did today. It is. Oh, I am just so excited I can barely speak." I pulled the phone an inch away from my ear. "Mom, is everyone okay? You sound better than okay. We found it, Morgan. We finally found it." I froze. My eyes darted to the set of keys sitting on my kitchen counter, the keys to the house I had bought 4 days ago, the house nobody knew about. A cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. Had someone seen me? Had the bank sent mail to their address by mistake? "Found? What?" I asked, my voice tight. "The house," she practically shrieked. "The perfect house for you. It is in Oakwood Terrace, just off the main boulevard. You know, the one with the big hydrangeas out front. We just left the viewing, and Morgan, it is absolutely stunning. It has a sunroom." The air left my lungs in a rush, but it was not relief. It was a different kind of suffocation. Oakwood Terrace was an affluent neighborhood where houses started at $600,000. It was completely out of my price range, and completely not what I wanted. "Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I am not looking for a house in Oakwood Terrace. We talked about this. I am fine where I am." "Oh, stop it." She dismissed me instantly. "You are not fine. You are living in that shoebox. But listen to me. It has 4 bedrooms. Morgan, 4 in the kitchen. It has these marble countertops that are to die for. I do not need 4 bedrooms. I live alone." "For now," she chirped. "But you have to think about the future. You have to think about resale value. This is a forever home." Suddenly, my father's voice boomed in the background, muffled at first, then loud as if he had snatched the phone or leaned heavily into it. "It is an investment. Morgan," he said. His tone was not excited, it was authoritative, the voice he used when he was explaining to a mechanic why they were wrong. "Real estate is the only way to build real wealth. You have been throwing money away on rent for too long. We are stepping in to fix that." "Stepping in." I gripped the phone tighter. "Dad, I did not ask you to step in. I cannot afford a house in that zip code. My salary is—" "We have crunched the numbers," he interrupted. "It is structured. We are going to help with the down payment to get you started, and the monthly rate is manageable if you just tighten your belt a little. It is all worked out." "Worked out," I repeated. The phrase sent a chill down my spine. "What do you mean, worked out?" "We put in the offer," my mother said, her voice returning to the line, triumphant, "and they accepted it. Can you believe it? The market is so hot right now. But the agent, well, we charmed him. He pushed it right through." I stood up, the roll of packing tape falling from my lap and hitting the floor with a hollow thud. You made an offer," I stammered. "On a house in my name? Well, we had to act fast. she said, defensive now. If we waited for you to drive down here and hum and haw over everything, we would have lost it. This is a huge opportunity. Morgan, why are you acting like this? You should be thanking us. I did not sign anything, I said, my mind racing. You cannot make an offer without me. It is just a verbal agreement for now. Mostly, my father said, his voice dropping an octave, sounding oddly evasive. But the paperwork is being drawn up. We told them you would be there on Saturday to sign the closing intent. We gave them the earnest money check already. You gave them money. $5,000, my father said. Non-refundable. So do not be difficult. Morgan, do not let that money go to waste. I stared at the wall of my apartment. They had spent $5,000 of their own money to lock me into a mortgage I never asked for a house I had never seen, in a neighborhood I could not afford. But something did not add up. My parents complained about the price of gas. They complained when the cable bill went up by $10. Where did they get $5,000 to drop on a whim on a Tuesday afternoon? And how did they get a seller to accept an offer from a third party without proof of funds from the actual buyer? I can't do this right now, I said. My head was spinning. Saturday, Morgan, my mother said. Her voice lost its bubbly quality and hardened into steel. Noon. Do not embarrass us. We have already told the neighbors you are moving in. Mom, we are doing this because we love you, she said, cutting me off. Someone has to look out for you since you refuse to do it yourself. You will see. Once you are in there, you will realize we were right. We are always right. The line clicked dead. I lowered the phone slowly. My hand was shaking. They had found the perfect house. They had put down money. They were forcing my hand. But as I stood there in the silence of my rented apartment, the fear began to curdle into something else. It was a cold, sharp suspicion. They said they put down $5,000, but my father had asked me for $200 last month to fix his lawnmower. I looked at my banking app on my phone. I logged in. My balance was fine, but then I clicked on the tab for my credit report, which I checked religiously. Everything looked normal. Yet, the unease in my gut would not go away. They spoke with too much confidence. They spoke as if the money was already there, as if my consent was just a formality they had already bypassed. I was not just being controlled. I was being maneuvered. And for the first time, I realized that my secret house was not just a sanctuary. It was the only piece of solid ground I had left in a landscape that was rapidly turning into quicksand. The silence in my apartment after my mother hung up was heavy, but it was no longer the silence of confusion. It was the silence of a crime scene. I sat at my kitchen table, the unsealed box of winter coats forgotten on the floor. My mind, usually trained to track shipping containers and logistics supply lines, shifted gears into forensic analysis. The numbers did not add up. My parents were people who bought store-brand cereal to save 50 cents. They were the people who drove a car with a cracked windshield for 2 years because the deductible was $500. Where did they get $5,000 for an earnest money deposit on a house I did not want? And more importantly, how did they get a real estate agent to take them seriously without my financial records? I opened my laptop. The screen glowed blue in the dim room. I did not log into my main bank account. I knew that one was secure. Instead, I went deeper. I pulled up a full credit history report, paying the $30 fee to get the expedited version from all 3 bureaus. I scrolled past my student loans, which were paid off. I scrolled past my car payments. And then I stopped. There was a credit inquiry from 3 days ago. It was from a lender called Southern Trust Mortgage. I had never heard of them. I frowned and dug further back. I began to look at the history of an old savings account I had opened in college. It was a joint account with my mother, created when I was 18 so she could transfer me rent money. I had stopped using it a decade ago, leaving only a few $100s in it to keep it open. I logged in, resetting the password because I had forgotten it. When the balance loaded, my breath hitched. The balance was not $200, it was zero. But the transaction history was a roadmap of secrets. Over the last 5 years, thousands of dollars had moved in and out. Deposits from Hale Family Trust, a distinct entity I knew nothing about, and withdrawals to various contractors and creditors. Then I remembered. The memory hit me with the force of a physical blow. It was Thanksgiving, 3 years ago. The air had smelled of turkey and stale cigarette smoke from my father's jacket. We were in the living room, and my father had slid a stack of papers across the coffee table toward me. Just some updates for the family insurance policy. Morgan, he had said, handing me a pen. Since you are still listed as a beneficiary, we need to update your consent for the asset protection plan. It is just legal mumbo-jumbo to keep the taxes down. Do I need to read it? I had asked, reaching for the page. Oh, honey, do not bore yourself. My mother had laughed, pouring me a glass of wine that was a little too full. Your father spent all week with the agent. It is just standard stuff. Sign here, and initial the bottom. I had signed because I was tired, because I wanted to avoid a lecture about how I didn't trust them, and because I thought they were just being their usual chaotic selves. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I had saved under Legal Consult. It was for Julian, a contract lawyer I had met through work. It was late, but he answered on the second ring. Morgan, he asked. Everything okay? I need you to look at something, I said, my voice sounding calm, almost robotic. Hypothetically, if I signed a document giving someone limited power of attorney for asset management 3 years ago, could that be used to initiate a real estate purchase in my name today? There was a pause on the line. I could hear Julian shifting in his chair. Morgan, that is a very specific hypothetical. If the language was broad enough, yes, they could use it to leverage your credit profile. They could use it to prove to a lender that they have the authority to act on your behalf. Why? What happened? I think my parents are buying a house, I said, using my credit, using my name, and using money that they might have cycled through an account I technically co-own. If they put down earnest money, Julian said, his tone turning sharp, and if they used your name on the purchase agreement without your specific current consent, that is fraud. Even if you signed a power of attorney years ago, fiduciary duty implies they have to act in your interest. Buying a house you do not know about is not in your interest. They called it an investment, I said. They can call it whatever they want. Morgan, you need to freeze your credit, tonight, and you need to send a cease and desist. No, I said. The word surprised me. No. If I freeze it now, they will know I know. They will play the victim. They will say it was a misunderstanding, or that they were just trying to surprise me. They will gaslight me until I think I am the crazy one. I looked at the transaction history on my screen again. I looked at the date of the credit inquiry. They were so confident. They were so sure that I was just a passive piece on their game board, a resource to be mined rather than a person to be respected. Morgan, this is dangerous, Julian warned. If that sale goes through, it won't, I said. But I need to see how far they are willing to go. I need them to put it in writing. I need them to stand in that house and tell me to my face that they own me. You are playing with fire, Julian said softly. No, I replied, closing the laptop with a snap. I am just finally reading the fine print. I hung up. The feeling of betrayal was there, sitting in my chest like a block of ice, but it was not melting into tears. It was hardening. They wanted me to come on Saturday. They wanted me to sign the final papers. They wanted their puppet to perform. I would go, but I would not be the daughter they expected. I would be the stranger they had created. The glow of my laptop screen was the only light in the room, casting long, distorted shadows against the walls of the apartment I would soon be leaving. I sat there, staring at the evidence of my parents' deception, but my mind was drifting backward, pulling up memories I had filed away under the label of independence. For years, I had worn that label like a badge of honor. Now, in the stark light of the fraud they were attempting to commit, I realized it was never a badge. It was a muzzle. I remembered the summer I turned 16. My brother, who was 14 at the time, had been caught shoplifting a video game. My parents spent weeks agonizing over it, hiring a lawyer, taking him to counseling, and hovering over him with a frantic, suffocating sort of love. That same summer, I was working 2 jobs, one at a library and one at a dairy bar, saving every penny for a car. When I finally bought a beat-up sedan for $1,200, my father didn't check the tires or the oil. He just slapped me on the back. "Look at you," he had said, beaming with a relief that had nothing to do with my achievement. "We never have to worry about Morgan. She figures it out. She is the low-maintenance one." Low maintenance, I whispered to the empty room. That was the trap. That was the hook they had buried deep in my cheek. By praising me for needing nothing, they conditioned me to ask for nothing, while they poured their time, energy, and finances into the problem members of the family. I was the resource they could tap into whenever the well ran dry. I was not a daughter to be nurtured. I was an asset to be liquidated. I thought about the family vacations where I slept on the pull-out couch while my cousins got the beds because Morgan doesn't mind. I thought about the college tuition I paid myself, taking out loans I had only just finished repaying, while they co-signed for my brother's business ventures that evaporated into thin air. "You are the strong one," my mother would tell me, usually right before asking for a loan. "You are the rock of this family. Rocks do not move. Rocks do not complain when you step on them. Rocks stay where you put them so you can build your fantasies on top of them." But the woman sitting in the dark was not 16 anymore. I was 34. I managed international supply chains. I negotiated contracts worth millions of dollars. I knew the difference between an investment and a scam, even when the scam was wrapped in the language of parental love. This house in Oakwood Terrace wasn't a gift. It was a leash. They wanted the prestige of the address, the bragging rights at the country club they couldn't afford, but they needed my credit score to get through the door. They were willing to saddle me with 30 years of debt so they could play house on weekends. A wave of fury rose in my chest, hot and corrosive. I wanted to pick up the phone and scream at them. I wanted to drive to their house and throw the stack of printed bank statements in their faces. My hand trembled as I reached for my water glass. "No," I said aloud. "Not yet." Screaming would only prove them right. If I screamed, I was just the emotional daughter who didn't understand finance. If I screamed, I gave them the opportunity to comfort me, to gaslight me, to tell me to calm down while they signed my name on the dotted line. I took a deep breath, forcing the anger down into a cold, hard knot in my stomach. I needed to be colder than they were. I needed to be the rock one last time, but not the kind they could build on. I would be the kind that sinks a ship. I stood up and walked to the window. The city lights blurred through the glass. I had bought my own house a modest, solid, paid-for reality. They had bought me a fantasy, a sprawling, expensive lie. "You want a closing day?" I asked the reflection in the window. "I will give you a closing day." I went back to my desk and printed the documents, the credit report, the unauthorized inquiry, and the transaction history showing the transfer of funds. I placed them in a neat folder. Then I went to my closet and pulled out the outfit I would wear on Saturday. It was sharp, professional, and severe. It was not the clothes of a daughter coming home. It was the armor of a woman going to war. The pattern stopped here. The manipulation ended this weekend. They had spent a lifetime training me to be independent, to handle things on my own, to make the hard decisions. On Saturday, I was going to show them exactly how well I had learned that lesson. Saturday arrived with a sky the color of a bruised plum, threatening a storm that never quite broke. I drove to Oakwood Terrace with the folder of bank statements sitting on the passenger seat like a loaded weapon. My phone had buzzed incessantly all morning with texts from my mother. "Do not be late. Wear something nice. We are making a good impression." I parked my paid-off sedan behind my parents' leased luxury SUV. The house loomed before me. It was a sprawling colonial revival with columns that looked like they were trying too hard to be important. My mother was already on the porch, waving frantically. She looked manic, her eyes wide with an adrenaline fueled by spending money that did not belong to her. "Morgan, finally," she called out, rushing down the steps. Come on, Mr. Sterling is already inside. You are going to die when you see the foyer." "I am sure it is." "Impressive," I said, keeping my hands deep in my coat pockets. I did not hug her. Inside, the house smelled of fresh paint and staging furniture. My father was standing in the living room, pointing at a fireplace that was large enough to roast a whole pig. He turned when he saw me, a tight, nervous smile plastering his face. "There she is," he announced, his voice booming a little too loudly. The homeowner herself. A man in a sharp blue suit stepped forward. He had the polished, predatory look of a high-end real estate agent. "Ms. Hale," he said, extending a hand. "It is a pleasure to finally meet you. Your parents have been singing your praises. They said you are a very busy woman." "I like to keep track of my affairs," I said, shaking his hand firmly. "I understand we are close to a deal." "Close?" Mr. Sterling laughed, a smooth, practiced sound. "We are at the finish line. With the pre-approval letter from Southern Trust coming through yesterday, we are just looking at a few signatures on the addendum. The sellers are very motivated." I felt a cold spike in my chest. Southern Trust. The name from my credit report. Southern Trust, I repeated slowly, looking directly at my father. "That is interesting. I do not recall speaking with a loan officer there." My father cleared his throat, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "Well, you know, we have connections. Morgan, we did the legwork to get you the best rate. We wanted to save you the headache." "That was thoughtful," I said, my voice flat. "Mr. Sterling, what rate did they quote us?" 6.2%, the agent said, flipping open a leather-bound folder on the kitchen island, which, in this market, is a steal. And with the 20% down payment your father mentioned, the monthly carrying costs are right in the sweet spot. I walked over to the island. My parents followed, hovering close, their anxiety radiating off them in waves. I looked down at the paper. There it was, buyer Morgan Hale. 20%, I said, tracing the words on the page. That is $150,000 on a house listed at $750,000. That is a lot of liquid cash. "It is an investment in your future," my mother interjected quickly, placing a hand on my shoulder. Her grip was tight, bordering on painful. "We are pooling resources. We are making it happen. Why do you have to question the details right now? Look at this kitchen. Morgan, imagine Christmas here." I stepped away from her touch. The air in the room grew heavy. "Mr. Sterling looked between us, his smile faltering slightly as he sensed the shift in temperature. "So," I said, turning to my father, "you have $150,000 ready to transfer." "Today, we are moving some things around," my father said, his face flushing red. "Liquidity is fluid. We have the earnest money down. The rest is just logistics." "And the application," I continued, my eyes locking onto his. "Who signed the credit authorization, because I certainly did not." "Morgan, don't be dramatic," my mother hissed, her smile now a rictus of panic. "Mr. Sterling doesn't need to hear our family admin." "Actually," I said, my voice raising just enough to cut through her noise, "Mr. Sterling needs to know exactly who he is dealing with. Mr. Sterling, did you receive a power of attorney document with this application?" The agent blinked, looking confused. I believe your father submitted the initial intent digitally. He said he was acting as your proxy for the negotiation." "Proxy," I said, testing the word. "Dad, since when do you have my digital signature on file?" The room went silent. The only sound was the hum of the expensive refrigerator. My father looked at the floor. then at the agent, then at me with a mix of defiance and fear. "I did what had to be done," he muttered. "You were too busy. You would have overthought it. We found the perfect house, and we secured it. You should be thanking us for handling the paperwork." "Handling the paperwork," I repeated. "Is that what we are calling forgery now?" "Forgery." Mr. Sterling's head snapped up. He closed the folder. "Ms. Hale, if there is an issue with the representation—" "There is no issue," my mother cried out, her voice cracking. She gets cold feet. It is a big purchase. She is just nervous." "I am not nervous," I said, my voice icy calm. "I am informed, and I am curious. If I call Southern Trust right now and ask for the recording of the verification call, whose voice will I hear? Yours?" "Mom." My mother's face went pale. The silence that followed was not the silence of a viewing. It was the silence of a trap snapping shut. They had brought me here to celebrate their victory, but they had walked right into my interrogation room. "Mr. Sterling," I said, turning away from my parents to face the agent directly, "there seems to be a fundamental misunderstanding here. I cannot purchase this property, not only because I did not authorize it, but because I am legally barred from taking on a second primary residence mortgage. You see, I closed on my own home 4 days ago." The silence that followed was absolute. It was not the quiet of a library. It was the vacuum of space. Mr. Sterling's mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. My mother made a noise that sounded like a tea kettle beginning to boil, a high, thin wheeze of disbelief. "You... what?" my mother whispered. Her face, previously pale, began to mottle with red patches. "You bought a house without telling us, without asking us." "I did," I replied calmly. "It is a 3-bedroom ranch on the west side. It is fully in my name. And the keys are currently in my pocket." "The west side," my father barked, stepping forward aggressively. The shock was quickly morphing into something ugly. "You bought a piece of junk in the slums. You threw your money away on some rot-infested shack when we found you a palace." "Are you insane?" "It is a solid investment," I said, ignoring his volume. "And more importantly, it is mine. I did not need your permission to buy it, and I certainly did not need you to commit a felony to buy this one." "Do not use that word," my mother screamed. She stomped her foot on the hardwood floor, looking less like a mother and more like a toddler denied a toy. "We were helping you. We were saving you from your own bad taste. You selfish, ungrateful child. We spent weeks on this. We put our reputation on the line with the neighbors, and you went behind our backs. Selfish is spending $5,000 of money that isn't yours to lock your daughter into a debt she didn't ask for," I countered. My voice did not rise. I kept it level, monotone, the voice I used when explaining supply chain disruptions to angry clients. I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder I had prepared. I placed it on the marble kitchen island that my mother loved so much. I opened it to the page with the highlighted credit inquiry. "This," I said, pointing to the line, "is unauthorized use of my personal identification. And this," I flipped the page to the bank transfer history, "is wire fraud. You moved funds from the joint account funds that were legally mine to pay the earnest money deposit." Mr. Sterling leaned in to look at the papers. His tan face went gray. He realized suddenly that he was not standing in a kitchen. He was standing in a crime scene. "Ms. Hale," the agent stammered, backing away from the counter. "If these allegations are true, I cannot be a party to this transaction. I have a license to protect." "You listen to me, Morgan," my father growled, ignoring the agent. He pointed a shaking finger at my face. "You are going to fix this. You are going to sign those papers, and we are going to sell that garbage house you bought. You are not going to humiliate us. I am your father. I know what is best for you." "You know what is best for your ego," I corrected him. You wanted a trophy house to show off to your friends, but you needed my credit score to buy it. You used me. You have always used me. We raised you, my mother sobbed, switching tactics instantly from rage to martyrdom. She clutched her chest. We sacrificed everything for you, and this is how you repay us, by threatening us with paper. You are destroying this family. Morgan, the family was destroyed the moment you forged my digital signature, I said. I looked at Mr. Sterling. I strongly suggest you cancel this contract immediately and return the earnest money to the source account. If you do not, I will be filing a police report for identity theft by 5 o'clock this evening. You wouldn't dare, my father sneered, though his eyes darted nervously to the folder on the counter. You wouldn't put your own parents in jail. You don't have the guts. I am not the same person I was yesterday, I said. I looked him dead in the eye. I have a mortgage to pay. I have a job to keep. I cannot afford to have my credit ruined by fraud. If you push me on this, I will protect my assets. Do not test me. My father opened his mouth to shout again, but he stopped. He looked at the hard set of my jaw, the stillness of my hands, the flat resolve in my eyes. For the first time in 34 years, he did not see a daughter he could bully. He saw a stranger who held all the cards. The air left him, and he slumped slightly, looking suddenly old and small against the backdrop of the grand, empty kitchen. We are leaving, I told the agent. Do not contact me again unless it is to confirm the cancellation. I picked up my folder. I did not look at my parents. I walked out of the perfect kitchen, through the perfect foyer, and out the front door, leaving them standing in the wreckage of their own scheme. I have already retained counsel, I said, my hand resting on the cold metal of the car door handle. The sky had turned a slate gray, and a fine mist of rain was beginning to coat the paved driveway. My parents stood a few feet away, huddled together near the hydrangeas my mother had been so excited about just 20 minutes ago. The bluster and volume from the kitchen had evaporated, replaced by a frantic, vibrating energy that smelled like panic. "Counsel," my father repeated. His face was the color of ash. You hired a lawyer against us. I hired a lawyer to protect my identity, I corrected him, keeping my voice low and dangerously even. If the perpetrators of the fraud happen to be my parents, that is a detail for the police report, not a reason to look the other way. Morgan, please. My mother stepped forward, her hands clasped together in a pleading gesture that looked rehearsed. You are overreacting. We can fix this. We can just shift the paperwork. We can put your name as a silent partner. We were just trying to help you build equity. Why do you always have to be so difficult? Difficult? I laughed, a short, sharp sound that held absolutely no humor. I am not being difficult. I am being legal. You owe us, she snapped, the pleading facade cracking for a split second before she tried to plaster it back on. We raised you. We fed you. Do you know how much we sacrificed so you could go to that fancy college? Do you know how many vacations we skipped so you could have braces? And now you threaten us with jail because we tried to buy you a beautiful home. Let us talk about sacrifices, I said. I pulled my phone out and opened the spreadsheet I had compiled the night before. You did not pay for my college. I took out $40,000 in student loans, which I paid off myself. The braces grandma paid for those. And as for what I owe you, I have transferred a total of $38,500 to your accounts over the last 7 years. My father blinked, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. That is an exaggeration. It is a calculation, I said, my voice cutting through the damp air like a knife. I have every bank statement, every transfer confirmation, every time you needed money for a medical emergency that turned out to be a credit card bill. I have paid for my own upbringing twice over. The ledger is closed. We are family, my father whispered, but his voice lacked its usual weight. It sounded thin, fragile. You do not sue family. You do not steal from family, I retorted. And let us be clear about what this is. This is not a simple misunderstanding. This is federal wire fraud, using electronic communications to move money across state lines for a fraudulent purpose. Do you know the penalty for that? It is up to 20 years in federal prison, and with the amount you moved, it is a felony, not a misdemeanor. My mother let out a small, strangled gasp. She looked at my father, her eyes wide with genuine terror. For the first time in my life, they were not looking at their daughter, the pushover. They were looking at a plaintiff. They were looking at the end of their comfortable, manipulative lives. You would really send us to prison? My mother asked, her voice trembling. Your own mother. In a cage. That depends entirely on you, I said. I opened my car door and tossed the folder onto the passenger seat. You have exactly 24 hours. By noon tomorrow, I want proof that the contract with Mr. Sterling is voided. I want proof that the $5,000 has been returned to the joint account, and I want a written statement acknowledging that you do not have my power of attorney. And if we can't, my father asked, his shoulders slumped. Mr. Sterling said the deposit was non-refundable. Then you better find $5,000 somewhere else, I said, sliding into the driver's seat. Sell the car, sell your furniture. I do not care. But if that money is not back in my name by noon tomorrow, my lawyer files the papers. The clock is ticking. I slammed the door shut. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the quiet neighborhood. Through the window, I saw them standing there in the light rain, looking smaller than I had ever seen them. They were not giants anymore. They were just two scared people who had realized too late that they had pushed the wrong person too far. I started the engine and backed out of the driveway, leaving them behind in the rearview mirror, shrinking with every yard I put between us. The drive to my new house was a blur of gray rain and red taillights. When I finally pulled into the short, cracked driveway of the ranch house on the west side, my hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles had turned white. I turned off the engine. The silence that filled the car was immediate and overwhelming. It was a sharp contrast to the screaming match in the driveway of the Oakwood Terrace house, where words like fraud and prison had hung in the damp air. Here, the only sound was the rhythmic tapping of rain against the metal roof. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The house was empty, save for a few boxes I had moved in earlier that week. It smelled of old pine and fresh paint. I did not turn on the lights. I just leaned my back against the closed door and slid down until I was sitting on the floor. My legs stretched out in front of me on the bare wood. This was it. This was what freedom looked like. It was not a triumphant montage with swelling music. It was a cold, empty house on a rainy Saturday evening, with a stomach that felt like it was full of broken glass. I thought about the family I had spent 34 years trying to please. I grieved for them, but not for the people they actually were. I grieved for the parents I had invented in my head, the ones who would be proud of my independence, the ones who would celebrate my success without trying to confiscate it. That family had never existed. The people I left standing in the rain were strangers who viewed me as a line of credit. It is over, I whispered to the empty room. The realization brought a wave of sadness, heavy and suffocating, but beneath it was something else. It was a feeling of lightness. The constant low-level anxiety that had hummed in the background of my life for decades was gone. I no longer had to worry about the next phone call, the next crisis, the next guilt trip. I had cut the cord. My phone buzzed in my pocket, shattering the peace. I pulled it out. It was a text from my mother. It was long, rambling, and full of typos. Morgan, please pick up. Your father is having chest pains. We are just so worried. How can you do this to us? We love you so much. Please let us explain. I read the words, and for the first time, I saw the mechanism behind them. The chest pains were a manipulation tactic. The love was a bargaining chip. I did not feel the urge to rush to them. I felt only a cold, clinical detachment. I typed a reply. My fingers were steady. If he is having chest pains, call 911. If you want to discuss the paperwork, I will meet you tomorrow at 10 in the morning. Not at the house, at the coffee shop on 4th Street. Bring the proof of the transfer. I pressed send before I could talk myself out of it. I stood up and walked into the kitchen. I did not have a refrigerator yet, but I had a kettle. I filled it with tap water and set it on the stove. While the water boiled, I paced the length of the small living room. I needed to be ready for tomorrow. This meeting would not be a negotiation. It would be a sentencing hearing. I went to my bag and pulled out the legal pad I used for work. I began to write down my terms. I listed every account I wanted my name removed from. I listed the exact amount of money they needed to return. I wrote down the contact information for my lawyer, just in case they decided to test my resolve. The kettle began to whistle, a shrill sound that echoed through the empty house. I poured the water into a mug and held it between my hands, letting the heat seep into my cold skin. I looked out the window at the dark street. The rain was letting up. I was alone. I had no furniture. I had just declared war on my own blood, but as I took a sip of the hot water, I realized that for the first time in my life, I was standing on my own floor. I was drinking water from my own tap. Tomorrow, I said softly. We end it tomorrow. I set the mug down and went to the bedroom to retrieve my sleeping bag. I would sleep on the floor tonight. It did not matter. It was my floor. And tomorrow, I would face them one last time, not as their daughter, but as the owner of my own life. The coffee shop on 4th Street smelled of burnt beans and wet umbrellas. I sat in a booth near the door, my back straight against the vinyl seat. I had arrived 15 minutes early, not because I was anxious, but because I wanted to control the terrain. On the table in front of me sat a single black folder and a cup of black tea that I had no intention of drinking. My parents walked in at exactly 10 o'clock. They looked like ghosts of the people who had stood in that grand foyer yesterday. My father's shoulders were slumped, and he wore a jacket that looked like he had slept in it. My mother's eyes were swollen, rimmed with red, bereft of makeup. They did not wave. They did not smile. They slid into the booth opposite me, bringing with them a cloud of misery and damp wool. "Morgan," my mother breathed out, her voice cracking. We didn't sleep at all last night." "I slept fine," I said. My voice was devoid of inflection. "Did you bring it?" My father didn't make eye contact. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled transaction receipt. He slid it across the table with a trembling hand. "I had to cash out a portion of my retirement fund early," he muttered, staring at his hands. "The penalty it was steep. We lost almost 30%. "That sounds like a personal finance problem," I said, picking up the receipt. I scanned the numbers. $5,000, transferred back into the joint account. The date stamp was from this morning. "It is all there," my mother whispered. "Every cent. Are you happy now? You made your father beg the bank manager to expedite a wire transfer. It was humiliating." "Humiliation is better than incarceration," I replied. I placed the receipt in my folder and pulled out a crisp, stapled document. I set a pen on top of it. "This is the final step. It is a formal revocation of any and all power of attorney, implied or explicit. It also contains a clause stating that you acknowledge having no claim to my assets, my credit, or my property." My father looked at the document as if it were a death warrant. "Is this really necessary? We returned the money. We are family. Morgan, you are treating us like criminals." "You committed a crime," I said, leaning forward slightly. "The only reason you are sitting in a coffee shop instead of a police interrogation room is because I am choosing to be merciful. But my mercy has an expiration date. Sign it." "And if we don't?" my mother asked, a flash of her old defiance trying to spark in her eyes. "Then I walk out that door, turn left, and walk 2 blocks to the precinct to file the report I have already written," I said. "I am done negotiating. I am done being the retirement plan you didn't save for. I am done being the daughter you own." My father picked up the pen. His hand shook so badly that the tip tapped a rhythm against the paper. He signed. Then he pushed the paper to my mother. She looked at me, tears spilling over her cheeks, waiting for me to soften, waiting for me to tell her it was okay, that I forgave her, that we could go back to the way things were. I just watched her, my face a mask of stone. She let out a sob that sounded like a hiccup and signed her name. I took the paper, checked the signatures, and slid it into my folder. I closed it with a final snap. "Morgan," my mother said as I began to stand up, "what happens now? When will we see you?" I stood up, towering over them as they sat in the booth. I looked at the 2 people who had raised me, who had claimed to love me, but who had only ever loved the utility I provided. "You won't," I said. "What?" My father looked up, panic rising in his voice. "You can't mean that. We are your parents." "You were my parents," I corrected him. "Now, you are just 2 people I used to know who owe me nothing, and to whom I owe nothing. Do not call me. Do not come to my house. If you do, I will consider it harassment and I will take legal action." "Morgan, please," my mother cried out, reaching for my hand. I pulled back sharply, avoiding her touch. "Goodbye." I turned around and walked toward the door. I could hear my mother weeping behind me, a loud, jagged sound that turned heads in the quiet shop. A part of me, the old part, wanted to turn back and fix it, but the new part, the part that owned her own home and her own life, kept walking. I pushed open the door and stepped out into the street. The rain had stopped. The air was crisp and cold. I walked to my car, got in, and drove away. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. There was nothing behind me worth looking at. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you guys are tuning in from. So drop a comment down below with your city or country. It is always super cool to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed Morgan's journey and want more satisfying justice, please make sure to subscribe to Victoria Revenge Stories, smash that like button, and hit the hype button to help this video get recommended to more people who need a little revenge drama in their lives. Catch you in the next one.